For 2 days the fighting continued, without either side giving way. Even the immortals, who had been sent forward as a last resort, were forced to retire in confusion. 3 times Xerxes sprang from the throne where he was watching the battle in terror for his noblest troops. Night fell a second time on the lifeless bodies of many brave men, but the Persians had not gained an inch of ground. On the 3rd day the treachery of one man did what the skill and valor of thousands had tried in vain. When Leonidas took his stand at Thermopylae, he learned from the people of these parts that there was yet another road out of Thessaly, a roundabout mountain path which crossed the crest of Oeta and led down into the valley behind Thermopylae. They knew about this path, and the Phocians, they were the ones who were going to defend it, so they had a contingent of troops up there. And all of a sudden they hear marching coming up one day, the 3rd day. A Persian detachment was crossing the mountain, quote, crossing the mountain road under the guidance of a Greek named Ephialtes, a traitor. Both sides were taken aback at this sudden meeting. So the Greeks waiting up on the top did not expect Persians to come, and here they come, up this weird little pass. And the Persians did not expect there to be a contingency of Greeks on top of this mountain. Quote, the Persians, who expected to find the road clear, anxiously inquired of their guide whether these also were Spartans. Are those Spartans? Are those Spartans too? What the hell are you leading us into here? Reassured on this point, they summoned up courage to attack. The Persian arrows soon put the Phocians to flight, and now there was nothing to keep the invaders from descending the mountain and attacking the Greeks in the rear. Before the enemy closed in, scouts had brought word of their approach. A hasty conference was held, for the Greeks still had time to withdraw and save their own lives, and there was no shame in leaving a post it was no longer possible to hold. The Spartans alone had no choice. The laws of their country forbade retreat. They might die at their post, but they must not turn their back on the foe. The rest of the troops were ordered to withdraw, and if possible, check the advance of the Persians in the rear. The Spartans were to remain in the pass, and with them the Thespians, who volunteered to stay, and some Thebans, who however deserted after the battle. Leonidas and his men were resolved to sell their lives dearly. This time they marched right out of the pass, and themselves began to attack, driving the front ranks of the Persians before them. The space was too small for their numbers to tell. Some were driven into the sea, others trodden down in the morass, while some pressed on others, pushed them back, and the slave drivers with their heavy whips hunted them back into the fight. The Persians had, quote, great numbers, but few men, says Herodotus, while each of the small band of Greeks was a man and a hero, ready to lay down his life as a free gift for his country's sake. Now, Herodotus says the Persians had great numbers but few men. I've heard a quote from King Leonidas, that Xerxes brought with him many men but no soldiers. So take your pick. At last all the Greeks had their spears shattered and were forced to fight with their swords alone. Now Leonidas fell, and round his body the fight raged fast and furious. 4 times the Persians had all but captured it. 4 times the Greeks drove them back. At last the tiny band of survivors retired with the body of their leader into the narrow passage behind the cross wall, and sat down on a little mound exposed to the enemy in their front and rear. Here they were surrounded and slain, defending themselves to the last. While the Peloponnesians were fighting for Greek freedom at Thermopylae, the 2 fleets had been engaged at Artemisium. The Persians were at least 4 times as numerous as the Greeks, but these had an ally who had once before done them good service. Now, a little bit of equivocation. When the Delphians had asked the god for help in this great peril, he had bidden them offer up prayers to the winds, for the Greeks would find them powerful allies, would find the wind to be a powerful ally. That's what the gods told the Delphians. Once again, a violent storm came to shatter the Persian ships as they lay at anchor south of the Magnesian Peninsula. 3 days and nights it lasted, and sea and shore were strewn with corpses and wrecks. Calm returned on the fourth day, and the Persian fleet moved away to Aphitia, reduced in numbers, and therefore the Greeks thought a fairer match for their opponents. From this time forth they set up altars and offered prayers and sacrifice to the winds and Poseidon, the deliverer. It was only gradually they learned all that the storm had done for them. The Persians, fearing they could not destroy the whole Greek fleet in one battle, had dispatched 200 ships with orders to sail round Euboea and up through the straits from the south, thus enclosing the Greeks on all sides. They hoped to do by sea what Xerxes succeeded in doing on land, cut off the enemy in front and behind. Meantime, welcome news reached the Greeks. One of the Thracian sailors, who had deserted from the Persians, plunged underwater, and being a splendid diver, he managed to swim right across to Artemisium, a distance of 10 miles, underwater. It's believable. In this way the Greeks learned what damage had been done to the Persian fleet, and also heard of the force that had been sent round to hem them in. Now they could no longer escape even if they wished it, and the nearness of the danger gave them fresh courage. Themistocles, the Athenian admiral, who knew a great deal more about the naval matters than Eurybiades, the Spartan, Eurybades, the Spartan, who held the chief command, Themistocles persuaded the others, instead of waiting to be attacked, to sail out into the open and begin the battle themselves. The result was the capture of 30 ships by the Greeks. Night fell on the unfinished fight. Next day brought cheering news. The 200 Persian ships which had been sent round the island had been dashed on some dangerous rocks by the same storm which had done such damage to the main fleet. The Greeks need have no more fear of being taken in the rear. And best of all, they were joined by the 53 Athenian ships who had been able to leave their posts in the Euripus now that there was nothing more to fear in that quarter. On the third day the great battle of Artemisium was fought. This time the Persians attacked with their ships in the form of a crescent, for they intended to surround and cut off the enemy. It was the narrowness of the strait which saved the Greeks, for the enemy's line was broken through want of space, and their ships were dashed together and thrown into confusion. The Greeks could move much more easily, owing to their small numbers and better knowledge of these waters. Both sides lost heavily, both claimed the victory. But the Persian numbers were bound to tell at last. On land they had already prevailed. That very evening brought the news of Thermopylae. It was useless for the Greek fleet to linger now, for the southern road lay open to the Persians, and there was nothing to hinder their march to Athens. At last, the long-awaited vengeance was at hand. I think that was a much better treatment, don't you? I think that was much better treatment. Okay, so we're finished with Marathon. We're finished with Thermopylae. On to Salamis, Battle at Salamis. Now we're going to take here from Warfare in the Classical World by John Warry, W-A-R-R-Y, Wary, whatever. And we're going to take from page 36, talking about the Persian High Command. Then we're going to go from Warfare in the Ancient World back to Zimmern, Greek history. Then we're going to go to Star, and we're going to finish off, because we have to stitch together an understanding from various good authors and various good statements. So, the Persian numbers in the two invasions were so overwhelmingly superior that one tends to blame the Persian commanders for the startling lack of success. The initiative for both enterprises came from the great kings themselves, and there seems to have been no question of any significant power behind the throne. In other words, these kings were in power. They weren't doing the bidding of a priesthood or anything like that. Yet there is nothing particularly blameworthy in their conduct of the two operations, apart from the undertaking itself. In other words, they did pretty well trying to invade this little teeny tiny country, which they just shouldn't have tried to invade at all. There comes a time in the history of every empire when expansion has gone far enough, and stability and consolidation, if not retrenchment, are needed. The handful of Athenian and Eritrean ships that had abetted the Ionian revolt was a poor pretext for such a massive military naval effort. So the first thing he's saying right there is there's a time, perhaps the Persian Empire was at that time, when they needed to consolidate. I don't know. It looked to them like they were going to